I said the title of this webinar is How to Write Survey Questions. I would like to have a presentation on development and validation of a questionnaire. I don't know. I have here part one, development of the item pool of the questionnaire, which is very important. And then two, assessing the reliability and performing a validation of your questionnaire. So there are two different things. And I don't know if we're going to have time to get to both parts today. And if not, we'll just have another webinar. But I think it's really important to know how to write the questions in a way that it's understandable and gives responses that you want to hear. Several times when I have done a questionnaire study and I get the responses, I say to myself, oh, gee, I didn't word that question correctly because it seems like people misunderstood it. So there's a lot in developing and validation of a questionnaire, and it takes a long time, and it isn't just writing down questions and handing out the survey. With that, the agenda, well, introduction, why do questionnaires as opposed to qualitative research, scales, type of questions to avoid. I want to discuss this important difference between perceptions and attitudes, because I think there's a lot of confusion. There's also a lot of confusion between facts, perceptions, opinions, attitudes, which we'll discuss later on as shown in this agenda. Point of clarification, the term survey and questionnaire are often used interchangeably. However, a survey refers to a descriptive research technique or methodology, which could include interviews and focus groups or a questionnaire. Now, a questionnaire refers to a paper and pencil instrument through which information is obtained. And for our purposes, we usually say questionnaires are frequently developed to survey a population. Okay, so it isn't that my instrument is a survey. You want to survey individuals with a questionnaire. I just want to get out that distinction front and center. So let's right. Okay. So when to use a questionnaire? When resources and money are limited, a questionnaire can be quite inexpensive to administer, although the preparation may involve much efforts. Also, you use a questionnaire when if you feel it's necessary to protect the privacy of the participants. Anonymity is necessary to ensure honest responses, especially like if you do a survey study about responsible conduct in research, and you're asking people to self-report their misbehaviors. So when needed to ask sensitive questions, quantitative data is easy to analyze as opposed to qualitative data. It's easy to respond, fixed responses, and it's you can have a broad coverage, local, national, and international. So now the disadvantages of questionnaire, there's no clarification for ambiguous questions and inadequate motivation to respond from the person taking the questionnaire, whereas in an interview study, you do face-to-face. Poorly worded questions, a low response rate, inaccurate responses, and you cannot uncover causes or relationship between knowledge, attitudes, and actions, and essentially does not answer the question of why do you have this attitude? Why do you have this behavior? That is, if you want to know why, that's when you do a qualitative research or interview study. So just to capsulize it, um, qualitative research or interviews and focus groups, you're really exploring what you want to study. You don't know enough about the subject matter, and so you want to explore with an interview or a focus group. Whereas and the information you get from interviews, you may be able to construct a questionnaire, meaning you want to quantify the things, the responses you get in an interview study. I'll say more about that in a few minutes. So this is, let me just briefly walk you through this. So these are the steps, the sequence of questionnaire development. First, the background part, you identify your target audience and your purpose and goals of the doing the questionnaire, which we have gone over. You essentially ask the research question, and you've decided that a questionnaire is a good way to fill in that gap. Then you want to conceptualize the problem or the information you want to get. And these are called constructs, and I'll go over that in a few minutes. This is where you also decide whether you want to assess knowledge, attitudes, perceptions, opinions, facts, behavior, self-reported practices, and then you want to start generating some statements, or questions. But to help you generate the questions, I mean, what do you do? Do you take these questions out of thin air? So in developing the item pool, you want to, there are two ways to do it, based on existing literature or previous questionnaires, or you ask a panel of experts. And then once you have developed your item pool, then you want to establish what's called content and face validity. And you want to ensure that there's adequate cognitive understanding of the participants of the questionnaires that you wrote. And then once you have whittled down your item pool of the questionnaire and you're convinced it's understandable and it has content and face validity, which I'll go over, well, hopefully we'll have time to go over what that means. Then you pilot test for validity and internal consistency. And when we talk about this type of pilot testing for validity and internal consistency, we're talking about a sample size that runs in the hundreds in order to establish what's called construct validity. And then only then, that process may cause you to eliminate other questions on your questionnaire. Well, I know I was going to ask you, do you have any questions? And I'm not going to ask that because I'm sure you have a lot of questions, and that's the purpose of this webinar. Let me, all right. Okay, but this is the basic agenda a sequence of questionnaire development. Okay, here's another way to look at the idea of validity and reliability. So in this first diagram here, you want to hit the center of the target, and that refers to validity. Are you measuring what you want to measure? And reliability refers to really consistency of the answers, meaning that one test we want to do is reliability over time. So if you give the same questions to the same respondents over a period of time, like a week or 10 days, you want to make sure that you get the same responses from the participants. So this, the first diagram on the top left shows that you don't have validity or reliability because you're not hitting the target, and repeated attempts are inconsistent. This first diagram on the top left, these diagrams tries to bring out the concepts of validity and reliability. So validity means that you're measuring what you intend to measure. So you're hitting the bullseye here. You're hitting the target in the middle. And reliability means that on repeated questioning, you're getting the same answers from the participants, okay? And so this first diagram here, it's neither valid nor reliable. Whereas on the diagram on the top right, you're not hitting the target at all. So your questionnaire is not valid, but you're getting consistent responses, but it's really the wrong responses that you want because it's not valid. So again, this diagram shows, yeah, really good reliability, but no validity. Here, in this diagram on the lower left, you have fairly valid questionnaire. It's almost hitting the target, but it's still not very reliable. And the last diagram on the bottom right, you have a questionnaire that's valid. It's hitting the target. You're measuring what you want to measure, and the responses are reliable, meaning that over a period of time, individuals will answer in the same way. So, for example, if you have ambiguous questions with vague terms, the same person may answer the question differently because they're not interpreting the question correctly, which could, so that this brings out in broad categories the concept of validity and reliability. And as we go over how you measure these things, it might get clearer, but I wanted to give you a pictorial demonstration of what we mean by validity. You're hitting the target, and reliability, you're getting consistent answers. So developing the item pool of the questionnaire, well, as I said before, when you first start out, you want to identify what constructs you measure, we say determining the domains of interest that the question is intended to measure is known as constructs. Now, a construct is the abstract idea or underlying theme or the subject matter that one desires to measure by using survey questions. Now, some construct, like for example, responsible conduct in research may be multi-dimensional, meaning that they are composed of several related components. And to fully assess the construct may, because a construct or an idea may have many different components, you may then want to develop subscales to assess the different components of the construct. And I should have some example of that later on. So now, how do you identify the constructs? There are two ways. So this really gets at the heart of the matter. How do you start writing these questions? What gives you the background to know what type of questions you want to ask? And you could, there's several different methods. One, you could conceptualize relevant concepts from the existing literature based on what you want to study, or previously published questionnaires. If it's a relatively undeveloped construct, you may want to obtain the content of your construct by doing focus group interviews. You want to make sure that you include, fully include all the content related to a construct. So let's say if you're doing a study about responsible conduct in research and you want to know all the different misbehaviors, well, you could get that from the existing literature or look at previous questionnaires, or you could analyze focus groups of, let's say, researchers or members of the IRB to make sure that you're getting a complete content of your construct. So what do we measure? I think I saw some, well, here's the title of a survey. A survey of perception, knowledge, awareness, and attitudes in regard to environmental problems in a sample of 2 different social groups in Jakarta, Indonesia. So it's all over the map: perception, knowledge, answers, and attitude. So here's a slide showing KAP. So what does KAP stands for?
Knowledge, attitude, and practice.
Number 1, 2, 3, or 4?
1, I think.
1 and 4 are same.
I think number 1.
Yes, 1 and 4 are the same. My apologies for that.
Yeah, it's 1.
Well, it could be 1 or 4.
It can be 4.
Well, it's
is it always plural for attitudes and practices, or is it knowledge, attitudes, and practice?
The short answer, it could be any one of these. But I hope to convince you that I really think the important things to measure is knowledge. Knowledge, attitudes, practices. Perception is also an important thing. But how do you choose? How do you choose? So essentially, why do we measure KAP? Whatever that stands for, KAP. Why do we want to do surveys or questionnaires? What's our ultimate goal in social science research?
Because we want to see the knowledge of participants or any population about any specific area. We want to know, either we need to give in any awareness session or education or etc. etc. So we need to know the knowledge of people.
Okay, but yes, we need to know the knowledge. But why do we want to know the knowledge? I mean, what's the ultimate
measure
goal
the
here?
impact.
What's
We
that?
want to measure the impact of this knowledge on the behavior.
Ah, yes. Okay, right. So it's the behavior. That's the. I mean, social science research is all about trying to understand behavior of individuals, why they do the things they do. So we do want to. Attitudes are considered an important aspect of behavior. Well, attitudes indirectly measure or tell you about intent. Now, perceptions are important. You want to measure perceptions because if people have the wrong perceptions of the existing world, then you may do awareness campaigns to correct the perception. Perceptions often does not reflect reality if you're able to understand what reality is. So now attitudes.
Prof, excuse me.
Yes.
May I ask a question? On the previous slide, where does knowledge fit in? I see you've got attitudes for the behavior.
Oh, yeah, this is not a complete. This slide mainly is focusing on the attitudes. But now, what did you ask? Where does perception
No, where does knowledge fit in? Because in the previous slide to this, we talked about knowledge, attitudes, and practices. So I was just curious to see where each of those influence behavior, or do they?
Right. Yeah. Now, all of them do. I think attitudes are the most important of all of them. Well, of all of them, if you could measure intent, but sometimes that's difficult. So, of all of those different categories, attitudes are the most important thing. Now, on the other side of the scale, you have knowledge. You want to know if people have what their knowledge is about the subject matter, whether they know about facts about the subject matter. Now, perceptions is how they, and I'll go over this as well, perception is how people perceive things or how they look at things or how they see the world around them. Now, they could have correct or incorrect perceptions. So you have knowledge, perception. If you want to squeeze in awareness, awareness is I think close to knowledge, and then you have perceptions, and then you have opinions, and then you have attitudes. So on the one end of the scale, you would have facts. What is their knowledge? And you want to know what their knowledge is. But I think more important than knowledge is what is their perception? They may have faulty knowledge or incomplete knowledge, but that's why I ask, what is their perception of how they see the world around them? And then you have attitudes, is what are their evaluation of the knowledge or their perception? And we'll go over the questions in a few minutes. And then you could then also measure self-reported practices. And then at the end of the day, you want to do correlation tests between attitudes and behavior. You want to see how strongly their attitudes are related to behavior, or their perception related to their behavior. And if you see a strong correlation between the two, then now you could develop awareness campaigns or educational programs to see if you could change attitudes that don't reflect subjective norms. And I have that on that slide. And so the whole purpose of the questionnaire is to see how people are behaving and what are the influences of that behavior. Again, it could be, I think the two most important things are perceptions and attitudes related to behavior. And it's always good to throw in knowledge as well. So for example, one time I did a survey study investigating individuals, the lay public, concerning genetic research or donating a biospecimen. And one of the questions involved, would they give their blood sample for genetic testing? And 70% was neutral. And we'll talk about that category. Or more specifically, they didn't know what genetic meant, and so they had no opinion. Then we finally explained to them what genetics is, and we repeated the question, and now they were able to formulate an opinion or an attitude, whether they would donate a sample of blood for genetic testing, if that's clear. So when we get to the questions, I think it could become even clearer. So the importance of attitudes. Researchers are interested in people's attitudes. That's a psychological construct. It is a person's predisposition to respond favorably or unfavorably to activities, people, events, or objects. And as I said before, it's often considered a precursor to behavior. Attitudes are evaluative statements. A perception is not evaluating anything. A perception is how I see the world. Attitudes is I evaluate what I'm seeing. It's less stable than values. It has a cognitive component, affective component, and a behavioral component. Now, researchers have developed a variety of attitude rating scales to measure the intensity of an attitude's affective, cognitive, and behavioral component. These scales may require a respondent to rank, rate, sort, and choose when we assess an attitude. And so here's an example of 3 different scales to measure attitudes. Okay, we have on the right a dichotomous scale, do you regularly attend class? Although that question is not really an attitude. For each pair of statements, choose a number that indicates how well the statement describes you. And so you have a scale from 1 to 6. And probably the best scale to measure an attitude is the Likert scale. strongly agree, agree, undecided, disagree, strongly disagree. So again, dichotomous, semantic differential, or a scale, and the Likert formats. So let's take a break from attitudes, and I just want to go over quickly the different formats of your questions. So it could be pre-coded, single choice questions. It could be presence or absence questions, rank ordering questions, Likert-Type questions, or open-ended questions. So that's the even in a questionnaire, you could have open-ended questions where the person would write down an answer to a previous question, and you could now you can't quantify those open-ended questions, but you could do a short type of qualitative research looking at those responses. So, but you decide if you want to add open-ended questions, and sometimes you might, to get at the concept of why. Why did you put that down? Why did you choose that? Why do you have that attitude or that perception? Okay. I just wanted to get that out. So dichotomous question, well, it's usually agree or disagree. It's the simplest way to analyze, but not highly sensitive. Multiple choice questions consist of 3 or more mutually exclusive categories and ask for a single answer. And multiple choice questions allow for easy analysis, but may not give the respondent the answer they want to give. Let me go over this quickly. So pre-coded single choice, answers are pre-coded for easy data entry, but if not all options are listed, then you have an other category. But the categories need to be mutually exclusive, cannot overlap one another. So here's an example: pre-coded single choice. What year are you in? What topping do you like the best on dessert? That second question really deserves an other category as well. Another typical pre-coded is marital status. So all of the pre-coded single choice answers we mainly use in the demographic section of the questionnaire. Presence or absence, yes or no. So have you ever had contact with a physically handicapped person in any of these groups? Just simple yes or no. Rank order scales. This type of question asks the respondent to rank items or choose items in a particular order from a set. You might ask your respondent to order 5 things from least to most important. Let me just skip that for question of time. Let me see. What sources do you prefer for writing term reports? Please rank them according to most preferred, least preferred. So you give all these items and they have to rank order these sources for writing term projects. So now you have rating scales where you have on the left side, not at all satisfied, extremely satisfied. And this is a slider mechanism where the person would slide to how greatly they were extremely satisfied or not at all satisfied. And Another type of rating scale is shown here, where you have identifiable categories, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's a little bit less sensitive than the sliding scale technique. So you have to decide how many categories to offer, and whether you want to define your scales by numbers or attitudes. So here is, I'm sorry, adjectives. So adjectives, numbers, or just plainly good, not good. Now, Likert scales. These questions allow the respondent to assess a particular issue based on a given dimension. You provide scales that gives them an equal number of positive and negative choices, ranging, for example, strongly agree to strongly disagree. Again, these questions are very flexible, but again, it does not answer the question why. Now, open-ended questions allow the respondent to respond in their own words. They can be useful for gaining insight into the feelings of the respondent and address the issue of why. So that's how the use of open-ended question, it gets to the issue of why. Now, there's many different types of responses in Likert-Type questions. You could have strongly agree, disagree, neutral, agree, strongly agree. By the way, just a little trivia. The scale is named after Rensis Likert, developed in 1932 for his doctoral thesis. And I only began to know this a few months ago. It's pronounced really Likert and not Likert. But having said that, you'll hear me say Likert because I've spent the last 20 years saying Likert, but it's really as Likert. So the different, here are the different types of scales. Agreement. If you want to know the extent of agreement, you have disagree to agree, familiarity, frequency, important, not important, extremely important, the likelihood that you'll buy something or vote for somebody, not likely, extremely likely, quality, poor to excellent. So these are the different types of Likert scales based on what you're measuring. Definitely, well, definitely not. So for that measures intent. We just develop a questionnaire for biobanking research or genetic research, and we wanted to ask them what's their intent of donating a biological sample. Definitely will, definitely will not. And here's another showing a matrix. I enjoy using this product, strongly disagree to strongly agree. Now notice here, we have this neutral category. However, I want to make an example about this neutral category. There's a different, and you see here, I haven't used the product at all, not applicable. And we many times forget to use that category. So essentially, so this question here, marijuana should be made legal, strongly disagree, neutral agree, strongly agree. However, you have to be careful here. Respondents who choose neutral, and that's the only choice they have, they respond neutral because they are really neutral about the issue, or they do not know enough about the issue to form an opinion, or they may not want to reveal their true opinion, even though it's an anonymous questionnaire. So you really need to have a neutral category, and if you think it may be applicable, you want to have a separate category don't know. Respondents does not know about the issue to have any opinion or attitude about it, or the respondents know about the issue, but does not have a positive or negative opinion. So I urge you to consider, in addition to a neutral category, I don't know category. Also, the other thing in asking questions, especially with attitudes, you don't want all the questions to be in the same direction, meaning that it's likely they'll all say agree. You want to mix up the direction of the question, and so meaning that, as I said previously, an attitude, the so-called a correct attitude reflect society norms. And so you may want to phrase the question so that it's the opposite of reflecting a subjective norm. So again, let me go back to responsible conduct of research. You could ask a question like, there's nothing wrong about plagiarism. The correct answer to that would be disagree. And then you may want to have a question. Faculty members should be modeling responsible behavior concerning plagiarism. And an attitude that reflects the subjective norm would be agree. So you want to mix it up. Now, when you're calculating a score for a set of questions, you have to reverse score those questions. When you're scoring a question, you may want to give 5 points for strongly agree. But if the attitude question is the opposite, then you want to give 5 points to the strongly disagree. Is that making sense?
Prof, could you repeat why it is necessary to mix up the questions?
Oh, okay. Good question. I glossed over that because the respondent may get in the habit of answering all the time agree for the sake of time. If you mix up the questions, that's a way of ensuring or knowing if the person actually read the question. Again, with questionnaires, you may get inaccurate responses. So this kind of, if somebody if somebody puts down agree with saying plagiarism is okay, and then puts down agree, there should be regulations against plagiarism, those are inconsistent answers.
So in this case, excuse me, so in this case, when we will calculate total, if we want to calculate total scoring, so do we need to do reverse coding to sum up the total score?
Yes, right. No, that's what I said. When you want to, if you're scoring each question, you then want to do reverse scoring to add up the points. So if one question is phrased so that the agree reflects subjective norms, you want to give 5 points for the so-called correct answer, the correct attitude. Now, if the correct attitude should be in the form of disagree, then you want to give 5 points to disagree. That's reverse scoring. And
is there a minimum number of questions you need to have in order to include the mixed up questions? So for example, if you just have like 2 questions on what's the attributes of self-esteem, for example, then you wouldn't really need to mix it up then.
well,
In other words,
yeah, you're right.
your
You have 2
questionnaire
questions,
comprises.
but
Yeah.
let me say this, that if you have 2 questions in a construct, the Cronbach alpha, which we'll get to either in this lecture or a future one, is going to be unreliable.
Okay, so there's a minimum number for each construct?
The minimum number is 3.
Right, okay.
Right, yeah, good question. Okay. So let me skip over that. So here we have agreement, frequency, I'm going to go fast, importance, likelihood, emotional, well, let me skip this slide. Okay, so essentially, a well-written question, this is very important, will mean the same thing to everyone. So you have to know your target audience. You have to know their extent of intelligence, and you have to make sure it means the same thing to everyone. And this is very important when you develop questions. So we're gonna, we have to make sure that everybody comprehends the question. So you want to use simple language and keep sentences as brief and concise as possible. You want to respondents to be able to provide accurate answers without having to do research, and you want to avoid ambiguous terms. Double-barrel questions you want to avoid. Questions should only measure one thing. Double-barrel questions try to measure 2 things. For example, do you think the president should lower taxes and spending? That's a double-barrel question, and respondents will get confused, and they may think, well, lower taxes, but don't increase spending. Or did you finish your work before your boss fired you for always being late? So what is that asking? Because you're not finishing your work, or you're being late. Was the content marketing seminar worthwhile and entertaining? That's asking 2 questions. The other thing is to avoid bias and loaded words. A biased question will lead participants in the direction of a particular answer. We also say these are leading questions. Some phrases, particularly adjectives and adverbs, may add bias to the questions. Or if you use emotionally or politically charged or sensitive words, can also trigger a different response. So you always want to remain neutral. So here's, for example, do you think the school should cut the gym budget and pay crossing guards? Would likely prompt a different answer than asking, should the school employ crossing guards to protect our children, even though they're both related to the same topic. So, cut the gym budget has a negative connotation, and it may be a leading question. And so here's another example. Should concerned dog owners vaccinate their pets? Well, the word concerned is a leading question. And when you ask it this way, most people will say yes. So you put the pet owners who don't vaccinate their pets on the defensive, just creating bias. And instead, you want to ask, do you think dogs should be required to be vaccinated? That's an unbiased question. Another example, do you believe the U.S. should immediately withdraw troops from the failed war in Iraq? Which are the biased words here?
Failed.
Failed.
Yes, right, the failed war. And that's a leading question. Do you support or oppose the death tax? What's the leading question here? Or the leading word?
Death.
Yes, right. And so sometimes the associations could be more subtle. For example, do you support or oppose President Bush's plan to require standard testing of all public school students? Well, it's subtle, but I think the word standardized testing will make most people say yes. Or they may have an opinion about President Bush himself. So this gets to be too political. Avoid vague or imprecise terms. You want to make sure the terms will have the same meaning to all respondents. For example, how important is that a candidate share your values? Values is vague. You may want to ask, how important is that a candidate share your religious values? Be specific. For example, don't ask, what is your income? A better question would be specific and might ask, what was your total household income before taxes in 2005? And complex sentence, if you go to the bottom, how easy will it be for a typical person to answer? Do you think the increase in the rate of immigration controlling for the economy is higher or lower than the increase in the rate of crime in your area? A person would want to skip that question. And let me skip this because I want to, how much do people have another 15 minutes, 20 minutes? I'm hoping everyone will say yes. But anyway, yes, I want to go over the difference between perception and attitudes and facts and opinions. So here is a study that says participants' perception towards biobanking and biospecimen donation for research. And then you get into the results section, and it says table 3 show participants' attitudes towards biobanking and biospecimen. This investigator did not have any set of questions regarding perceptions. And so this investigator was totally confused between perception and attitudes. And many times people think perception and attitudes are the same thing. And this is very important because if you do a study investigating attitudes, and all of your supposedly attitude questions are really perception questions, your paper is going to get rejected. So let's explore this. Perception versus attitudes, opinion versus attitudes, fact versus perception. Now, as I said before, perception to me is how I see things or how I see the world. It has no evaluative component. This is what I see. I perceive this to be a lousy day due to the weather. That's a perception. Attitude, the counselor should have developed indoor activities for a rainy day. That's my attitude. responding to the lousy day. And my attitude is reflected in my behavior because I perceived it to be a lousy day. I'm going to complain to anyone who will listen. Again, perception is what you see through your own personal glasses, unlike everybody else. Attitude is how you react to your perception and show the world what you think about what you've seen related in your behavior. Well, let me go over this for the sake of time. Perception, the process happens within the brain that makes sense of the information coming in. Now, an individual may interpret or perceive may be substantially different from reality. And selective perception occurs when an individual limits the process of external stimuli by selectively interpret what he or she based on beliefs, experience, or attitudes. So now perception is influential in our behavior. So by understanding how individuals see the world, we may be in a better position to facilitate change if you want to change perception. And changing perception is a lot easier than changing attitudes. So here's an exercise. Let me, in the chat box, why don't you put down, and don't hit return, okay? In the chat box, which of these items are perception or attitude? So either put down perception, attitude, attitude, perception, or perception, attitude, attitude, perception. People should give biospecimens in order to help, that should be treat future diseases. Biobanks do not appear to lead to important research. Giving biospecimens should, I'm sorry for the spelling attitude. Oh, okay. I didn't give good instructions. Okay. 1 and 4, yeah, put down the number and what you think it's an attitude or perception. Personal information is unlikely to be stolen from a biobank. So number 1 is mainly.
Number 1 is attitudes.
What's that?
Attitudes.
Right. Okay. And the when you write an attitude question, you know, if you're able to put in the word should, that's a tip off that it's an attitude. Here's the answers. Biobanks do not appear to lead to important research. That's a perception. It's this is how I see the world. Giving biospecimens should not get in the way of a person's medical care. That's an attitude. And again, it has the important word should. And then personal information is unlikely to be stolen from a biobank. And that's a perception. Okay. Now, if a person puts down disagree for this statement is unlikely to be stolen from a biobank, one could say that the person has an incorrect perception, and then you want to maybe change that. Now here, this is an attitude. If someone puts down strongly disagree, then you have to try to understand why they strongly disagree. Is it because of a faulty perception, lack of knowledge, or the opinion? Again, you know the attitude is strongly disagree, but you don't know why. But you may do some correlation analysis to get at that. Now, knowledge versus opinion. Knowledge is considered to be proven, or at least provable. An opinion. Now, opinion is somewhat related to attitudes. and they're interpretations of a fact. It's an idea that is considered to be unproven or unprovable, an opinion, okay? Let me say now that a lot of times I see attitude questions or what is purported to be attitude questions when it's really opinions. And now opinions and attitudes are very close together, but there really is a distinction. Now, sometimes it may be difficult to distinguish between opinion and attitudes. Knowledge is what it is. Opinion is what you think it is. I'll give you some examples. Well, here, facts. The United States was established in 1776. The pH levels in acids are lower than pH levels in alkalins. Beethoven had a reputation as a virtuoso pianist. Opinion, useful to persuade, but the careful listeners will notice and demand evidence. Example, that was a good movie. That's an opinion. Is that an attitude? Well, the answer is no. Strawberries taste better than blueberries. The death penalty is wrong. Now, someone may think that may be an attitude, but it really is just an opinion. The death penalty is wrong. If you really want an attitude, you could reframe that question and say, I don't know, Thailand should abolish the death penalty. That's more of an attitude, but that's how opinions could be closely related to attitudes. Beethoven had a reputation as a virtuoso pianist is overrated. That's an opinion. Well, let me skip this slide. Okay, here's some more examples. All right, I'm going to make you work here. Here's a set of questions. Is it fact, perception, or opinion? Okay, well, why don't you go to the chat box? Biospecimens refer to blood, saliva, and tissue. Which one is that?
Fact.
What's that?
Fact.
Fact. Okay, good. Okay. People who give biospecimens help prevent. Hold off your answers.
Yes.
Hold off your answers. I want to give people time to think. Okay. Okay. People who give biospecimens help prevent diseases.
It's an opinion.
Other thoughts? I said hold off your answer. Give people time to think. So I will give you a cue on when to give me your answer. All right, what do people think? Is it a fact? Okay, number two. Well, it's between perception or opinion. And I think it's more of a perception. Giving a biospecimen gets in the way of a person's medical care.
Just one regarding number three. It's an opinion or perception.
Well, that's what we're going over now. Giving a biospecimen is a waste of a person's time.
Mm-hmm.
But regarding number two, why this is a perception?
It's a little bit confusing.
Well, is it a fact?
No, but
No, it's not a
there
fact.
is no proof, but it's maybe opinion.
Well, an opinion, Well, see, the third one, giving a biospecimen is a waste of a person's time.
It is also opinion.
That's an opinion, but when you compare it to the second question, no one is offering an agreement or disagreement. It's just a perception that giving biospecimens help prevent diseases. Whereas in the third one, that's giving a negative or positive.
It seems to be like a judgment aspect in the opinion.
Oh, okay, that's a good word. Right. That's a very good word. It's judgment. Whereas in the second one, there's no judgment. Thank you. Okay. So now, giving a biospecimen gets in the way of a person's medical care. What do you think, perception or opinion?
Opinion.
Other thoughts? I think that's more of a perception. I'm going to use that wonderful word, judgment. So here's personal information is unlikely to be stolen from a biobank. Perception or opinion?
I would say perception.
Yes, I would agree with that. Plagiarism occurs when someone takes another words or ideas without giving that person any credit.
Fact.
Yes, right. Good. Fact, perception, opinion, perception, fact. Well, here I put down opinion. I think I said perception.
Yes.
So it's
sometimes it's confusing.
Well, it's not confusing. It's close, or you could say it is confusing. But realize the difference. Here's opinion or attitude. A general consent should only be accepted when samples are anonymous.
Attitude.
Right, should. A research participant has the right to establish limits regarding the research that can be done using his or her tissue.
Opinion.
Yeah, it's opinion. Now, a question like that could be often I see as an attitude. Now, one could say that's an attitude. If you want to write an attitude question, you should change that to a research participant should have the right. Okay, rather than a yes or no, has the right, as opposed to should. I would change that. If I want the attitude, I should have changed that a research participant should have the right.
But Prof, I don't see it as an opinion. I'm seeing it more as a fact.
Well, I was just going to say that. I agree with that. But maybe you're in a country that doesn't have that as a fact. It's not in the regulations. Okay.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
So, right? Okay. Again, I think in the second one, opinion and attitude are very close together. But if you want to seal the deal, you should write should have the right. The use of broad consent for research that anticipates future unknown research studies is acceptable.
Opinion.
No, right. Well, depending on your regulations in your country, that could also be a fact. A general consent should only be accepted when samples are anonymous.
Should equal attitude.
Okay, very good. Okay, good. This one, women express their emotions more than men. Perception, attitude, opinion.
Opinion. Or a fact.
No, a fact is not an answer. Perception, opinion, or attitudes. I'm glad a woman thought that was a fact, not a man. Women express.
I think it's the perception. Yes.
Yes, right. Women tend not to take their medicines.
Perception.
Yeah, right. And then women are very emotional about their illnesses.
Opinion.
I would agree with that, though. It could also be a perception, but I think it's closer to an opinion. And then.
But why? How are we distinguishing in this case between perception and opinion?
Well, it's difficult. I would.
I think it
push comes to shove, I would say it's more like a perception than an opinion. And so here's the last question. Women should not be trusted to take their medicines.
Attitude.
Attitude.
Right. So that's an attitude. So the moral of these exercises is that when you go to write your questions, you want to make sure if you're developing a perception scale, you want to make sure it's clear it's a perception. Now, most of the times, I don't see, well, that's not true. I see that people could have a scale looking at opinions. But the important thing is that in your attitude scales, make sure it is very clear you're asking for an attitude and not an opinion. An opinion, though sometimes could be close to attitudes, but you want to make sure you frame your question as an opinion, as an attitude. Okay, so questions. How many? What do we have here? I don't want to. Oh, let me just do. Let me see if I have. Oh, okay. Let me just go over for the sake of an exercise. Okay, do you see this question? Here's another example. I'm concerned about the amount of misconduct that occurs in my university. Attitude, perception, or neither?
Perception, I think.
Perception.
Well, the word concern gives an evaluative component to the question. A perception would have been, there is a lot of misconduct that occurs in my university. That's a very neutral statement. I'm concerned is closer to an attitude, but I would rephrase the question. For example, leaders in my university should do something about the misconduct. I would say, though, that that's probably closer to neither. The responsibility for misconduct lies with the principal investigator only. Attitude or perception, or neither.
Perception?
No, I think the word responsibility gives an evaluative component to the statement. He's expressing an attitude. Dishonesty and misrepresentation of data are common.
It's an opinion. It's not a
well, no. The choices are attitude, perception, or neither.
Neither.
We have the word should. That's more like an attitude. I'm expressing.
No, we are talking about dishonesty.
I'm sorry?
We are talking about dishonesty, one before.
Oh, dishonesty
before.
And misrepresentation
Yes.
of data. Yeah, that's a perception. That's a perception. It's just stating how I see the world. It's common. This one here should report instances of research misconduct. This is my attitude. I monitor my trainees' work to ensure that they are developing into responsible researchers. Attitude, perception, or neither. If you're having a hard time trying to determine whether it's an attitude or perception, it's probably neither. I am aware of regulations that govern research involving human animals or laboratory practices.
Opinion?
How many people agree, disagree?
I think it's neither. It's a knowledge.
Yeah, it's neither. If I really wanted to classify it, I would call that awareness. Now, knowledge would be, there are regulations in my country that govern research. Here, you may want to know how many people are awareness of regulations. So, again, very distinct. Fact, awareness, perception, opinions, attitudes. And I'm just urging people to look at their questions. And if you can't decide if it's an opinion or an attitude, you should rewrite the question. And if you want more examples of mistakes being made, all you have to do is pick up any published paper that did a questionnaire and look at if they're stating an attitude that really is an attitude, or is it a perception? And again, perception is you want to measure how people see things. They may perceive things incorrectly, and you want to know that. And if a lot of people perceive things incorrectly, then you have to change their perception. if people have attitudes that deviate from society norms, then you want to change that. However, changing attitudes, it's much more difficult than changing perceptions. Perceptions are closer to facts, and attitudes are closer to opinions. So, intuitively, I mean, it's easier to change people's perception as opposed to attitude. And the other thing you want to do in questionnaires is correlate. A really good questionnaire will have perceptions, attitudes, and self-reported practices. Now, if you want to assess knowledge instead of perceptions, so that's the KAP, knowledge, attitudes, practices. I personally am more interested in someone's perception. All right, so it's I think it's an hour and a half after. I think in order to do justice to the concept of assessing understanding of questions, assessing content and face validity, and then assessing reliability is one major topic, and then doing a survey study, a study itself in order to establish validity, exploratory analysis, developing how many factors or how many factors or domains you have in your questionnaire, and then your Cronbach alpha, the internal consistency. I like to regard the Cronbach alpha more of consistency rather than reliability. I personally understand that better as consistency, because you want to make sure all the questions in a subdomain are internally related. And that's the Cronbach alpha. And then you also want to know if, by doing a factor analysis, how many factors are you measuring in your questionnaire, and whether all the factors are related to each other. Now, depending on if you get what we call a low factor loading for a question, then you want to get rid of that question. If the Cronbach alpha could be increased by getting rid of a question, then you want to eliminate that question. And then at the end of the day, you may have, and this is what happens all the time, you start out with 90 items on your questionnaire, and after you do all this reliability and validation testing, you come up with 50 questions, which is good. Okay. All right. Asma, how could I decide what should my research questions measure? Well, you decide that in the very beginning of when you're developing your study, and you want to know what's the research gap. However, having said that,
no, I mean, how can I decide if I want to measure perception or attitudes
well, no,
regarding
that's
my
what
question?
I'm saying. I'm saying that one, it depends on the research gap. Personally, I would like to measure perception, attitudes, and behaviors. And sometimes it may be difficult to measure behavior, so you got knowledge, attitude, perceptions. I think if you're going to go to the trouble of doing a survey study, you might as well get knowledge, attitudes, perceptions, and if possible, self-reported practices. So I think it's an hour and a half. I appreciate your engagement, but let me have, what do you think? Another session to get at the other part of testing for reliability and validation, because that's going to take at least a half an hour. And I don't want to, right, okay. Hands up. Another session?
Agree.
Agree.
Can I ask a question, please?
Yeah.
Do you consider satisfaction? Is it attitude, or is it opinion or perception? No, not attitude. Is it perception, or is it opinion? Satisfaction with something.
I think satisfaction is more like an opinion.
Okay.
Okay, you want to rate how satisfied they were with this educational program.
Yes.
Okay.
Opinion.
I think that's more of an opinion. And hence the investigator should change their presentation. That's an attitude.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, we'll have another session for reliability and validity. I don't want to go fast over that subject matter. So next Monday, I believe Isabel May is going to give a session on scientific writing. So I get the feeling Monday mornings or Monday evenings or Mondays are the best day. I don't want to intrude on a weekend. And so maybe Monday is the best day. Okay. All right. If you have, so now when you look at questionnaires, look at it with a understanding, is that really an attitude question or a perception question? And again, you got to get it right, because a good reviewer will pick it up and will say, you didn't measure attitudes, you measured perception. Or your scale measured both. So how could you calculate an attitude score if you have perception questions in it? Okay. All right, guys. I'm trying to. After the last 2 months, you all were busy with your protocols, and I know you're still busy with it. But I think that now I'm trying to formalize the training by giving. I know a lot of people were trying to develop questionnaires, so I know this exercise is worthwhile. Blah blah blah, and scientific writing, will get you up to speed with the writing. We'll do more research methodology and statistics as well, okay, as you get through this program. Okay. All right, any last burning perception or attitudes? Okay, we'll leave that for a anonymous survey. Okay. All right, guys, thanks for listening. Okay.
Well, thank you very much. But do you have any idea as to when we'll do the content and validity session? Not next Monday. Would it be?
Right. Yeah. If it's let's say 2 weeks.
Okay. Thank you.
How's that? Okay. All right. Before this leaves your mind.
Correct. That's what I'm afraid of.
Right. Okay. Oh, well, in the meantime, why don't you start to look at published studies? And
Sure.
and then
And get more confused.
well, I was going to say get more confused, but share it with us. I'll put it on the forum.
Please, could you share with us any reference just to clarify the difference between perception, opinion, and
Oh, okay. Yes. I'll put it on the on the website. I'll tell you where I put it. Okay.
Okay.
Yes, I have some good references. Very good. Okay. Good idea. Thank you.
Prof. Henry, can I just say something, please?
Yes.
Can we have like a mini? You remember the first session when we had a little or a small group discussion with our mentors to review our proposals. We've done lots of modification till the moment. Is it possible to have like tiny sessions, or we can arrange it with our mentors?
That's a good question. There's been somewhat changes with the dyad, mentor and trainee, because of various reasons. But I think I was thinking about that we should mentors. Let me discuss with the mentors and have people. Again, I want people to see what other people are doing as well. So I think it's maybe time to have that session as people have come along with their protocols, and people should, your group members should be able to comment on that. Now, well, let me think more about the structure of that. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay. All right. Very good. Excellent.
See you. Bye-bye.
Yes. Right. Yeah.
Please?
Yeah.
Okay, I want, yes.
Yeah. At some point, the emailing doesn't get the work done. You need to have a conversation. I agree. Yes.
Yeah. On the spot. Yeah.
I want to ask a question.
Yes.
Is it valid to use a pre-made questionnaire and do the modification needed, or to construct a questionnaire from beginning?
Well, if you use the same questionnaire that's been validated, then you don't have to validate it. Now, if it's in a different language, you have to check for understanding. But if you modify a previously validated questionnaire, then you have to validate it if you throw some questions out.
Thanks a lot.
Oh, someone, right, sure. Thank you for, oh, okay. Yes. Right, sure. I posted an example of, yeah, why don't I do that? Let me post some examples of validating a questionnaire. And I'll add some good references on description of validating a questionnaire. Good, great. I'll do that as well. Okay. All right, I'm going to end the meeting. Thanks a lot. Okay, get some sleep. Okay. All right.